What comes to mind when you see this word? Greedy corporations, poor labor practices, environmental damage? Well, I'm here to offer you a different perspective. Let's start by putting our hands in our pockets, grabbing something, and raising our hands. Okay, across the room I see cell phones, I see keys made of metal, I see some ladies' cosmetics made from talc. Where do all of these things come from? Think about this, what's on the screen. It's simple but profound, yet so true. Your cell phone batteries have cobalt in them. The majority of cobalt in the world comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's me at the not-so-Democratic Republic of Congo at a copper-cobalt mine. Minerals overall account for $2 trillion. That's a lot. It's set to grow at 6.7% compound annual growth rate over the next 5 years. Global employment is estimated at 40 million in the informal and formal sectors. That's double the population of Sri Lanka. So what minerals do we have in Sri Lanka? Everyone knows about gemstones, but we've also got mineral sands on our east coast, which we make paint with. We've got quartz, which we make semiconductors with. We've got graphite, which we make a number of things with, including lubricants. And we have phosphate, which generates fertilizer. The Eppavala phosphate deposit has been known about for decades. However, it hasn't been commercialized. The dollars have not been dug up. 2 months ago, an enormous phosphate deposit was discovered in Norway, which dwarfs Eppavala. Eppavala may or may not be commercially viable now. In relation to all our mineral deposits, there are 5 factors I'd like to talk about which govern whether these can be made viable. How many of you think that if you own your land, you also own the minerals under it? Please nod. Well, it's a common misconception. Land rights and mineral rights are quite different. Mineral rights are administered exclusively through the Geological Survey and Mines Bureau, and land rights are disconnected from the mineral rights. Take, for example, when I was working in South Africa at the oldest underground coal mine. While we were working underground extracting the coal, on top of us would be corn farmers. The corn farmers had no say on the mineral economics of the coal mine. In Sri Lanka, 80% of land is owned by the government. In turn, this land is often administered through state-owned enterprises. The state-owned enterprises have boards which are political appointees. Hence, they may not have the interest of the country at heart and may have their own personal interests. Hopefully that piece of legislation, the anti-corruption bill which was passed earlier this month, will point them in the right direction. So if government controls 100% of the mineral rights and 80% of land rights, what share of revenue do they accrue from minerals projects? Our estimate is that 70% of a mineral project in Sri Lanka, government will accrue the revenue. This is despite the private investor taking up all the risk and generating all the capital. Why is this the case? It's because of mineral royalties. Royalty is a tax payable on the revenue line item rather than the profit, regardless of whether a mine is profitable or not. The royalty in Sri Lanka is double what it is in Australia. It's 3 to 4 times what it is in Africa. Hence, this is a hurdle for the mining companies. If you think about when in the mining life cycle a company can actually generate revenue and earnings, it's only through operations. First of all, there's an exploration stage, which is high-risk capital, and you may or may not make the discovery. Thereafter, you've got the permits and feasibility stage, including environmental clearance, and then you've got construction. Then in the operations stage, you make money. But before you get to that stage, you may have many years of losses, of being cash negative, and it's really important that the investor is protected in terms of their IP and their rights to proceed to mining, having invested all of this. And then you have the closure stage, where, as we mentioned, everything that's not grown is mined, so it's a finite resource, and the mine eventually has to close. So if you talk about revenue, how can we increase the revenue for everyone? It's through value addition. And I'm a fan of value addition. However, there are some perceptions which are disconnected from reality. Take, for example, the new wonder material, graphene, which is manufactured from graphite. Graphene sells for 100 times more than graphite. So one may say, let's ban all graphite exports and only allow graphene. However, this is too simplistic. We need to consider also that graphene costs a lot more to manufacture, maybe more than 100 times. Also, market size. Allow me to explain. From this sand, one can make paint, but you can also make a lot more things from the sand other than just paint. So it's about market size. Then you may hear people say, well, if we can't make our value addition now, ape sampath api ilanga paramparawata tiyagammu. Let's keep our resources for the next generation. However, even here, this is misguided. Consider, for example, petrol cars. They'll eventually all be substituted by electric vehicles. Countries like Venezuela, which have large oil reserves, may never be able to exploit all of them. And then there is the factors of production required for value addition. It's not just the raw material. You need power. All of us remember the power cuts last year and the bigger power tariffs that we are facing right now. Sri Lanka doesn't have a competitive advantage in power. You also need chemicals, gases, acids, which are generated as a byproduct of other chemical processes. In other countries, they pay you to take it away. In Sri Lanka, we would need to import these. And then even if you did manage all of that, you'd still have to deal with the hazardous waste. And nobody wants hazardous waste in their backyard. Moving on to environment. Many of you would say, yes, you can dig up the dollars, but at what cost? Any mine that does come into operation has a rigorous environmental clearance process. Agencies like the Central Environmental Authority or the Northwestern Provincial Environmental Authority go through a strict process of approving a mine, and then once it is approved, monitoring environmental compliance. We talked earlier about mines closing. I used to work in the year of the tsunami in Cornwall in southwest England at a kaolin mine. It was since closed and restored into the world's largest indoor rainforest, the Eden Project. Attracts over 500,000 tourists, about as much as we attracted for all of Sri Lanka in the last 6 months. Sometimes people talk about environmental disasters, and these do happen, but they are the exception rather than the norm. It's a bit like plane crashes versus car crashes. One makes the news, but statistically it's a lot less significant, and it's the same thing for mining. You all also all know about green energy, and the conversation on green energy often doesn't take into account where do these materials come from. Take, for example, a windmill. A 3 megawatt wind turbine requires 5 tons of copper. There's a clear nexus between mining and environment. It is estimated that certain green energy metals, over the next 25 years, we will need to mine more of it than we have used over the last 1,000 years. As we also talk about green energy, you need new skills, new knowledge, new know-how. And it is the same for mining. So what do we mean by know-how? Take, for example, a violin player. You need the instrument, the same way you need the mining equipment. You need the music sheets, the same way you need the operating manuals and procedures. But with those two alone, you cannot make great music. You need hours of practice. Some say 10,000 hours. You need that knowledge. You need to have made mistakes. You need to understand how things work and have the experience. It's the same thing for mining. If we want to dig up those dollars, we need specialist skills, knowledge, and ability. As much as we need know-how, we also need to be clear about what we do not want. So we do not want people who are trying to build their mine for the first time in Sri Lanka and learn on the job. We do not want foreign or local speculators trying to make a fast buck at the expense of corrupting our regulators or causing damage to the environment. So in conclusion, what could Sri Lanka's mining industry look like in 5 or 10 years if we address these 5 factors? Well, the clue to the future is often to look at our past. 100 years ago, Sri Lanka's largest export was graphite, accounting for 20% of the Sri Lankan exports. At its peak, it accounted for 30% of global market share. Men like the father of our founding Prime Minister, D.S. Senanayake, were graphite industry tycoons. Some, but not all of these minerals still exist, and they could be harvested. With new technology and new knowledge, they could be brought into production. If you take another perspective, this shirt that I'm wearing right now, I used to wear it when I was working in the iron ore mines in the outback of Australia. Thousands like me had a job because of the policy decisions that were made in Australia in the 70s, which liberalized iron ore exports, which had been constrained by compulsory steel manufacture. Today, iron ore accounts for $50 billion, the single biggest export from Australia. Is it possible that in Sri Lanka we could achieve 1% of that? I think so, and here's why. Look at our mineral sands resources. Our mineral sands known inventory is not dissimilar to what is there in Australia. However, we only have one mine operating since 1957, accounting for 1% of global market share. Australia, on the other hand, has 10 mines accounting for 20% of global market share. I'm aware of one company in Sri Lanka that has spent over $20 million on their research and development, exploration, drilling, feasibility, and is now set to bring into operation the first world-scale mineral sands mine. That mine alone can double Sri Lankan mineral exports. And in doing so, it will generate material revenue to government, as we saw earlier. It will also generate jobs and new skills. And we know that once a mine is in operation from the life cycle chart that we saw earlier, money can be reinvested in exploration and the discovery of new deposits. So I am confident of a rock-solid future for Sri Lanka. Let's start digging up those dollars today, and who knows, tomorrow we may find in our pockets more materials which were sourced and had their origin in Sri Lanka.